All right. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome, Toby, of course. And to everyone who's with us on the screen, we are back to our regular program. And we find ourselves on Yud Testament B's on 19b. Actually, just a little bit before we're actually before the Mishnah on that page. And by the way, if you have a standard Gemara, all you have to do is turn one more page or a few pages in the art scroll, and you'll see we are very close to finishing the Perek. God willing, in 1, 2, 3 weeks from now, we'll finish the second Perek. You know, that's kind of quick. I feel like we're now running through everything. Look at that. So once you can make it over the first Perek, it essentially becomes smooth sailing, at least in that regard. So we find ourselves about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines down from the top of the page on 19b on Yud Testament base. And basically, the Gemara does what it does. As we've seen many times, we will bring in a statement from a rabbi that pertains to our discussion. And once we bring that rabbi in, we say, you know what? He also had other good ideas to share. So we go on a little bit of a tangent. So here are a few other teachings. The Amar Achia bar Abba Amar Rav Yochanan, or Achia bar Abba said in the name of Rav Yochanan. Shiur hatefer halacha l'Moshe Sinai. So, okay, when you look at a Sefer Torah, of course, we talked about how it has to be stitched. We talked about what it has to be stitched of. But if you notice, it's funny, I once saw this on a Torah where it went really far down. I thought there was something wrong with the Torah. I didn't realize it was the halacha back, those many times ago. So they'll actually leave a significant amount of space on the top and on the bottom that's not stitched. You don't stitch all the way to the top and all the way to the bottom. Why? So Rashi explains for us. He says that what's going to happen is that you're going to be, let's say, lifting the Torah, rolling the Torah. So, and you're going to keep pulling it, and you're going to think, oh, it's really taut, it's solid, it's stable. And then what's going to happen is, God forbid, you're going to actually tear the scroll in half. However, if it's not sewn all the way at the top, it's a little bit more flexible. And you can see once the pages begin to be separating from each other, you're like, oh, I shouldn't be pulling that hard on it.
Like a slit in a skirt.
Oh, well,
Yeah, because if it's just sewn all the way to the bottom, you can't move your legs as much as if there's a little bit of a give.
Very good. So we get some like Chachmas Nashim in here to understand this. You guys heard Toby?
No.
Oh, let me move the microphone a little bit. I don't know if you want to. Or again.
No, it just said it was a little bit like the idea of a slit in a skirt, where if you have a little bit of a slit, then there's more ease in movement. It sounds a little bit like that.
See, this is why it's important for both men and women to learn Gemara, so that way we get all the haros. Okay, Shkaya. Yeah, you guys heard this time, right? Okay, good. So the microphone's working. So what happened? He hit it on the head. So originally he said it was a halacha Moshe Sinai. He doesn't change the rule. He just says that instead of this being a tradition that we have all the way back from Mount Sinai, it's something that the Rabbanan, that the rabbis instituted later, but it's not actually, it doesn't carry as much weight. But of course, we are rabbinic Jews. We practice rabbinic Judaism. And if the rabbis say to do something, we follow it nonetheless. That's lo sasur. Moving on. So Moshe Rabbeinu, if you remember, he goes in and then he's protected by the rocks as God's presence comes by. There's a similar episode with Eliyahu Hanavi, with Elijah as well. And what's teaching us is that God's glory is so great that had there been even the smallest little pinprick of light that could come through from God, then Moshe and Eliyahu would have been obliterated in that moment. How do we notice? Shenemar Kilo Yarani Ha'adam V'chai. It says pretty explicitly in the pasuk that no man can see God and live. What's the mean when it says that all these words are upon referring to the stone tablets with the 10 commandments? It means that God didn't just teach Moshe basic stuff at Har Sinai, but he taught him the Dikduke Torah, the details, the inferences that we can make from the Torah, as well as Dikduke Sofrim. Rashi explains what's Dikduke Torah. Ribuyin esin v'gamin mi'utin achin v'rakin. That anytime it says the word es in the Torah or the word gam, it's many times we don't know how to translate the word es, aleph suf, but actually you could actually darshan those. And then there's achin v'rakin. Anytime it says ach, we have ach. It comes up for in terms of Yom Tov, ach sameach, as well as whenever it says rak only in the Torah. These small little details that you think might just be filler words, they have messages to convey, and God conveyed all of that to Moshe Rabbeinu. Let's move this a little bit closer so to make sure everyone hears. The Dikduke Sofrim, as well as the Sofrim, what the rabbis will come up with later. Rashi says, and that which they will innovate later on, the mitzvahs midrabanan, umaynihu, and what's a prime example of a mitzvah midrabanan, a rabbinical mitzvah that they'll introduce later on? Mikra Megillah. So you think Megillah was made, and there's a classic Beis Halevi that comes up during Pesach, which he says many people think that the reason we eat matzah, the reason we have to bring a carbon Pesach is because Hashem took us out of Egypt, so we have to commemorate the story of the exodus of Egypt. But very radical thing he says is no, actually, these mitzvahs are inherently valuable, and God created the story of the exodus of Egypt and made it happen so that there be relevance for and meaning behind the mitzvahs for us to be able to grasp. So a similar idea over here, Mikra Megillah is already something important on its own terms, but God had to orchestrate that the story would happen at some point. By the way, it's possible I didn't do enough research. I think our Thursday morning folks, you might enjoy this one because we learned a while back, and I think in general we might be familiar with this story, that Moshe Rabbeinu went to the classroom of Rabbi Akiva, and when he got to the classroom of Rabbi Akiva, he's like, I don't understand what's flying over here. And then it's explained to Moshe that you were taught the general principles at Har Sinai, but years and years later, they took those principles and they mined it and they developed it later on. So you'd have to square that Gemara with this Gemara over here. This Gemara over here seems to be telling us that Moshe knew everything. He knew about Mikra Megillah. He knew all the details that were going to come up in the future. So how do I square this Gemara with the Gemara with Rabbi Akiva, which seems to indicate that Moshe Rabbeinu did not know about all these extra details that would be developed later on? I don't have a good answer. It could be maybe they are actually having a machlokus. I didn't look a lot into it, but I'm not aware of anyone immediately addressing it. Okay, is what it is. We now reach the Mishnah. Any questions before we go on to the Mishnah? Okay, so we actually started off with the easier stuff. I'm not going to sugarcoat this. This Gemara actually, the concepts in here are not complicated. It's just that it's a little bit of what I like to call a ping pong match. The Gemara, there's a lot of shakla v'tarya, a lot of back and forth, a lot of give and take in the Gemara, but here's kind of what we need to know. Take a look at the Mishnah. The Mishnah asks the following question. Well, who's allowed to read the Megillah? So in general, we talked about even in the past women reading Megillah, right? We learned that toward the beginning of the Masechta. Maybe even women can read Megillah. And the Mishnah tells us anyone can read the Megillah with the exception of a cheresh, shota, v'katan. So a cheresh in this context usually refers to a deaf mute. Here refers to someone, well, he has to be able to speak, otherwise he for sure can't be motzi others in listening and hearing and reading the Megillah, but he's not able to hear that which he says, but he knows how to actually lane the Megillah. Maybe he learned to lane the Megillah before he lost his hearing. What's a cheresh? So that's a cheresh. A shota, and by the way, just if you need to scribble down these terms because this term is going to come up throughout the entire sugya. So cheresh again is someone who is able to speak but is deaf. So just someone who's deaf. A shota is someone who I'm trying to think what's the most politically correct way of saying this. someone who lacks mental capacity. The katan refers to a child under 13 or a girl under 12. So those three categories cannot lay Megillah. They are not Yotzei the mitzvah, and certainly they cannot be Motzi others in the mitzvah. However, Rabbi Yehuda argues, or Yehuda says, but the one exception to the rule, I agree, but when it comes to a child can actually lay Megillah for other people. So the Gemara is going to mostly concern itself with the status of a cheresh, but we will talk also about katan in Tosos especially. So that's the basic breakdown of the Mishnah. Any questions on definitions? Because these definitions need to be clear. The whole Gemara is based on it.
So on the deranged, the Shota is defined by Art Scroll as a deranged person.
Yeah.
But when I think of the word Shota, I think of just somebody who's very low intelligence. So those are two very different things.
Yes, I mean, this is a subject, I think, of contemporary debate about drawing the line of who's considered Shota, who's not. It becomes very complicated. If you say someone's below a certain level of IQ, does that mean they become a Shota? Where do you draw the line at? And think about today also. Today, or let's say back then, right? Someone who's a deaf mute, we would say is essentially like a Shota because they can't pick up language and they can't convey language. They were that's why they're put in the same category as a Shota. However, nowadays, we had Helen Keller and we had all these kind of therapies that were developed. So someone might not be able to hear and to speak, but they could still have, with proper training, they'll have the same level of insight and intelligence as someone who can't speak and hear.
The footnote here says for a definition of this Chagiga.
Okay, so we'll have to take a look at Maseches Chagiga and see the breakdown of that. But that's a good question. Where do we draw the line on a Shota? Okay, going on to the Gemara. So the Gemara is going to concern itself this evening with determining who is the Tana Kama. So we know that Rabbi Yehuda argues on the Tana Kama. However, we'll see that it's possible the Tana Kama is the first guy in the Mishnah, the anonymous person. So we don't know who that is. So So when you just read the first part of the Mishnah, it implies that even b'diavad, a cheresh shota v'katan, even if you do decide to listen to them, it's not like we say, you know what, you put in a nice effort, you'll be yotzi the mitzvah anyway. Doesn't work like that. It'd be just as bad as if a non-Jew decided to lean it for you. You're not going to be yotzi the mitzvah from them, even b'diavad. So who is that? Amar Rav Masna, Rabbi Yossi. It must be Rabbi Yossi. How do we know? What's the position of Rabbi Yossi? That let's say someone lanes Shema and does not hear it. He doesn't say Shema out loud enough for his ears to pick up on what he's saying. I mean, you say Shema, so you have to say Shema Yisrael loud enough that you can actually hear what you're saying. Right? Yossi Omer lo yatzer. Yossi says, if you cannot hear what you're saying, you have not been yotzei the mitzvah. So, quick background. We're going to see basically there are three potential positions. The main issue of a cheresh is that he cannot hear that which he's laning. He is laning flawlessly, no mistakes. It's immaculate. But in the end of the day, if he's deaf, by definition, he can't hear that which he's saying. So there are three different potential approaches. One approach is the extreme to say, if you can't hear that what you're saying, you are not yotzei, even b'diavad. The other extreme is to say, it doesn't matter as long as you say something, even if you don't say it loud enough for you to hear it, even lecharchila you can do it. And of course, the middle approach will be lecharchila, you should hear that which you're saying. Anytime you need to make a bracha, anytime you need to lane something, you need to say something for a mitzvah, lecharchila, ideally you should hear it. But if you say it low enough, you still say it, it's just not loud enough for you to hear that what you're saying, b'diavad, ex post facto, that's okay. Those are the three positions. So our Mishnah, the Tana Kama, seems to take the most stringent position, which is if you're a cheresh, if you cannot hear that which you're laning, you cannot be motzi anyone, period, even b'diavad. That seems to be the position Rabbi Yossi here, who says that if I'm obligated to say Shema once in the morning, once in the evening, I'm going to have to repeat Shema later because I daven Marv before 3 stars came out, before Tzeis HaKochavim, which is around nowish. So if I say Shema not loud enough, for me to actually hear it, according to Rav Yossi, I have not fulfilled the mitzvah of Kriya Shema. Well, the same Rav Yossi who says that if you cannot hear Shema, you're not Yotze, is probably the Tana Kama of our Mishnah, who says, for this very same reason, a Cheresh, because he definitionally cannot hear that which he's saying, he can't be Yotze Megillah, and certainly he can't be Motzi others by laning Megillah. That sound good? Yeah.
Well, yeah,
Totally.
except the difference between the two is, I mean, a person doesn't have to read the Megillah themselves. They can be Yotze by listening. But with Shema, if I don't say it, then I haven't fulfilled my obligation. The fact that other people around me are saying it, they can't fulfill my obligation to say Shema.
Wait, so let me get this straight. And maybe this is what you're asking. Are you asking maybe the Cheresh, he can't hear it himself, but if he lanes flawlessly and I hear him laning, why can't I be Yotze from him? Is that what you're asking?
I'm just saying that they're fundamentally different mitzvahs. That I don't
Megillah and
see how-
Shema?
Right, because Megillah is something that I can fulfill my obligation by listening to somebody else read it. But with Shema, if I hear you say Shema, that doesn't fulfill my obligation.
Actually, I mean, I'm fairly certain that if one person is obligated in Shema and you listen, you can fulfill it as well. That's the principle of Shemea Ka'ona. Think about in Parsha Zachor. We come in, we hear the guy laying Parsha Zachor for us. Think about.
But that's not the same as Shema.
So I think for Shema, I mean, I have to check, but my impression is the same principle would apply of Shemea Ka'ona. That if someone who has an equal level obligation, equal or greater level obligation, reads the Shema and I listen, it's a good question. I don't see why it wouldn't apply. But the basic principle, the important principle to take away from here is if I have to lane something and I can't hear it, it's not considered like I said it. It doesn't count. That's Vizichar Rav Yossi. Okay, so that's Rav Masa. Rav Masa says that the Tanna Kama Rav Yossi, who absolutely rejects, if you can't hear that what you say, you have not said it. Who's to say Tana of our Mishnah is Rav Yossi? Dilma Rabbi Yehuda. Maybe Rabbi Yehuda is the Tana of our Mishnah. Now you're going to say, wait a minute, but isn't he like the second guy in the Mishnah? The Gemara is going to ask that question. Maybe the Tana of our Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda, and he says, L'chachila, you're not the Cheresh isn't Yotze, but Hadiyeved Shaper Dummy. However, B'diyevet, it's okay. Maybe the Tana Kama of our Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda. He takes the middle road approach, which says a Cheresh cannot be Motzi others in Megillah, but if he does do it and you listen to him, B'diyevet, you'll be Yotze nonetheless. We had a similar discussion about women laning Megillah, and we said, maybe there's reasons not to do it, but post facto, if you did hear women laying the Megillah, maybe that still counts. So the question is, maybe Rabbi Yehuda is the Tana of the Mishnah. Lo sagadayta diktana cheresh the shoda katan v'katan ma shota v'katan diavad namilo av cheresh diavad namilo. However, that doesn't make sense because cheresh shota v'katan are put in the same basket. So I know that a katan, I know a young kid, and I know that a shota, even b'diavad, cannot be motzi people in Megillah. So how can we say that the Tana of our Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda, who says that a Cheresh could be motzi someone b'diavad? He's only pasal l'chadchila. He's not allowed to be motzi people. But his two fellow co-categorists, whatever you call it, the other two folks in the category there, even b'diavad can't be motzi people. So the Gemara says, the Gemara just shrugs it off. The Dilma hug the Isa of a hug the Isa. You know what? We have to look at each and every category on its own. We have to look at Cheresh on its own merits, Katan on its own merits, and Shota on its own merits. So maybe a Katan and a Shota cannot be motzi anyone at all, even post facto. But maybe a Cheresh post facto would be motzi somebody. But now getting to like the stronger question, or the more obvious question on this, how could Rabbi Yehuda be the Tana of our Mishnah? Did you know who argues on the Tana Kama of our Mishnah? It's Rabbi Yehuda. So how could Rabbi Yehuda be both? How could he be the Tana of our Mishnah and then argue on himself at the end of the Mishnah? Right? That'd be a steer b'nei Yabei. The Gemara kind of repeats itself. Some Girsos take this out. The Dilma Kura Yehudahi mi dai racial posto say l'chsher. Okay, we can ignore that. The Dilma Kura Yehudahi. You know what? I can save this question. Maybe Rabbi Yehuda is the Tana of the Mishnah for the Reisha, the beginning, and the Seifa. The Trey Gavni Katan Ketanila. And when he says that a Katan cannot read the Megillah, and then he corrects himself and says a Katan can read the Megillah, he's actually not contradicting himself because he's talking about two different kinds of children. And it's going to be very relevant for our upcoming shir on children in shul. By the way, I don't know if I've ever stopped to emphasize, this is an important phrase just for Talmudic phraseology that you might want to jot down if you're doing that. That means there are words missing from our Mishnah, and this is how you read it. It doesn't necessarily mean that there are words that are literally missing from the Mishnah, but it means that we have to kind of read a little bit between the lines in the Mishnah. So how would I read the Mishnah in between the lines? This is an alternative reading of the Mishnah by adding in some extra words that conveniently make everything work for us. Hakol Ksher and Likros Megillah. Everyone is allowed to read the Megillah. Everyone's valid, legitimate to read the Megillah. Chutz mecher shot v'katan. Okay, nothing new yet, except for cher shot v'katan. Ba'med var ma'amurim. When do we say that a cher shot v'katan cannot be motzi other people? B'katan shelo higia lechinah. For a child who has not yet reached the stage of education, Rashi says it's about 9 or 10 years old. There's a debate about where you draw the line. But a kid who is a few years before bar mitzvah, he's already at the age where you're supposed to be mechanech him, you're supposed to educate him and teach him the mitzvos and keeping halacha properly. So actually the Tana of our Mishnah in the beginning and the end maybe it's Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda, when he says a katan cannot read, he's talking about a very young child. And when he says a katan is allowed to read, it's referring to a katan who, he's not bar mitzvah yet, but he's like 9, 10 years old, who's certainly within the age of chinuch and has that level of intelligence and mitzvah responsibility that he could be motzi others as well. So basically, this is all to get to the point that we have a question. Maybe Rabbi Yossi is not the Tana of our Mishnah. Maybe Rabbi Yehuda is the Tana of our Mishnah, and he says a cheresh b'diavad could be motzi other people. Unlike Rabbi Yossi would say that a cheresh even b'diavad cannot be motzi others. Basically, the Gemara keeps pounding Rav Masa's assumption that Rabbi Yossi is the Tana of our Mishnah. But Mayu kimta Rabbi Yehuda diavad. Why are we assuming that Rabbi Yehuda takes the moderate, the middle row position, and says that a cheresh should not be the laner in shul for Megillah, but if you heard Megillah from him, b'diavad, it's okay. Maybe Elahad Tani, right? This is a different Yehuda, I believe. Bareid Rav Shimon ben Pazi, cheresh hamidaber v'eino shomea. If you have a cheresh who can speak but cannot hear, our case, Torah lecharchila. When he separates truma, he can separate truma lecharchila, and he can recite the bracha. There's a bracha lahafresh truma. Not something we're making here every day, right? But money. So the key word over here is lechatchila. The cheresh lechatchila is able to say something, even though he can't hear it. He can say that bracha. So money. Rabbi Yehuda diavad in lechachila lo. Rabbi Yossi diavad nami lo. So this doesn't align with Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says a cheresh, forget about it. Even b'diavad he can't work. And Rabbi Yehuda says b'diavad he's fine, but lechachila cheresh shouldn't be doing anything, saying anything for a mitzvah that he can't hear himself. But here it's saying a third position, the most lenient one, that even lechachila cheresh can recite a bracha even though he can't hear it. So it doesn't fit with Rabbi Yehuda or Rabbi Yossi, and those are the only two shittas we're aware of. Must be the Lamai Rabbi Yehuda v'afilu lechachila. It must be Rabbi Yehuda, and we misunderstood Rabbi Yehuda's position. Rabbi Yehuda says that a cheresh kilein even lechatchila. And so what's the point of all this? Let me just zoom out for a second. The point is that Rabbi Yehuda cannot be the Tana of our Mishnah. Because the Tana of our Mishnah, at very least, has to say that at least lechatchila, a cheresh should not be laning, because the Mishnah says anyone could read the Megillah except for a cheresh shot v'katan. Very clearly, the Mishnah does not want a cheresh to be the Baal Koreh. The question is it a preference or is it an absolute rule? So if the Mishnah is the position of Rabbi Yossi, then it's an absolute rule. If the Tana of our Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda, then it would have to be that only b'di eved a cherish can lane for others. But the issue is, we just saw over here that Rabbi Yehuda seems to hold that even l'chachila he'd be okay with a cherish laning, which means he can't be the Tana of the Mishnah, which means the only guy we're left with is Rabbi Yossi, which proves Rav Mas's point that Rabbi Yossi is the Tana of our Mishnah. I know this is quite. I told you this is quite something. I warned this. There'll be something fun at the end. Don't worry. I planned a more like conceptually fun thing to do. So here's another brisa. This brisa says a person should not say, benching. We shouldn't say birchas hamazon belibo in your heart. Ritva and others point out this doesn't mean literally you thinking it. Certainly, if all you do is think birchas hamazon, but you don't actually move your mouth, you don't say anything, then you're not yotze. What it means is you're saying it under your breath. Then beirach yotza, and if you make the bracha, you are yotze. So now it sounds like there's a shita out there, or we're ping-ponging back and forth. There's a Tana out there who actually adopts the middle position, that ideally you should hear what you're saying when you say Berachas Hamazon. But if you said it under your breath really quickly, you're ever like, you're like a public setting and you just finish eating bread and like you don't want people to think like you're talking to yourself out loud. So you just like quickly under there, or you take your phone out and you pretend you're talking to someone. So let's say you don't really hear what you're saying because of that. So then b'di'evet your yotze v'lechatchila no. So money, who's the Tana? Lo Rav Yehuda v'lo Rav Yossi. Rav Yehuda fi lechatchila, Rav Yossi fi b'di'evet nami though. Because where we stand in the shock of the Gemara is, I can only conceive of two extremes. There's either Rav Yossi who says if you don't hear yourself saying the words, you're not yotze, and you have Rav Yehuda who says you don't have to hear it, even lechatchila, it's okay. So who holds the middle position that b'di'evet your yotze b'lechatchila, you shouldn't do that? So the final answer of the Gemara, we're going to have final two answers. La'olam Rabbi Yehuda va'afilu lechatchila. So we maintain Rabbi Yehuda still holds that even lechatchila, you don't have to hear that which you're saying. So he cannot be the Tana of our Mishnah. It's still Rav Yossi. V'lo kasha hadidei hadarabe. This comes up a lot in the Gemara. Also, when there's different ways of resolving a self-contradiction. One way to resolve a self-contradiction, what a rabbi says, is to say that sometimes he is propounding his own position, other times he's just conveying the position of his teacher, of his rebbe. So that's what's happening over here. Titania is our final brisa of the evening. Yehuda Omer Mishum Elazar ben Azariah. So his rebbe was Rav Elazar ben Azariah. Hakorei Shema, someone who's reading. Shema. We got the Shema. Hakorei Shema. Tzarich sheyashmiya la'azno. You need to hear. This has come up a number of times already in Megillah. You have to hear that which you're saying when you recite Shema. Shenemar Shema Yisrael Hashem Lakina Hashem Echad Hashmei Lo Asnacha Masha Tamotz Mipicha. It says Shema, listen. Meaning when you say Shema, you have to actually listen and hear that which you're saying. Parenthetical, we give the other opinion. Okay, you give me Yotze in your heart. Very beautiful. But the point over here is when it's not Rabbi Yehuda who holds that b'di'evet you could be Yotze. It's actually his Rebbe who holds that. Rabbi Yehuda takes an even more expansive position. He says even lechatchila you don't have to hear that what you're saying. What does that all mean? Okay, so I brought this. I don't know if you have chart. Does the art school give you a chart? This is why I got the handy. I got to show off my handy Mesifticum over here. It creates a beautiful chart which summarizes everything, and I'll tell it to you. So this is the maskana. This is the summary over here. According to this stage in the Gemara, this is all answer number one. Answer number two is like 2-3 lines. It goes very quickly. There's our Mishnah and then 4 brises, 4 other Tanaitic halachos that we learned. And we want to figure out who holds what. So in our Mishnah, a cheresh is pasal afilu b'di'evet. The cheresh cannot be motzi anyone at all, even b'di'evet. And that's the position of Rabbi Yossi, not Rabbi Yehuda. And then we had the case in the Gemara which said, Hakore Shema v'lo hishmiya la'azno yatsa. So when it says that Rabbi Yehuda holds that you can be Yotzei Shema even if you don't hear it, Rabbi Yehuda in this understanding the Gemara says even lechatchila you don't have to hear Shema. And then so who is the position? And then again, it's Rabbi Yehuda who also says that a cheresh lechatchila is able to make a bracha on truma. And then finally, the last brayso we saw, which says that if you say birchas hamazon and you don't hear, you only yotzei b'diavad, it can't be Rabbi Yehuda because Rabbi Yehuda says even lechatchila you don't have to hear that what you say. That's the position of his Rebbe, Rav Elazar ben Azariah. So what we have from this stage of the Gemara is, again, there's three shitos. Rav Yossi, this is the takeaway. Rav Yossi says, if you can't hear that what you're saying, you are not Yotze at all. Hence, a cheresh cannot be motzi anyone at all. On the other extreme, you have Rabbi Yehuda who says, even lechatchila, we love our all the chereshes, they could all lane, it's fine. And then the middle position is Rav Elazar ben Azariah, who says that lechatchila, you should hear that what you're saying. B'diavad, it's okay. Final few lines. Now that we've gone to this point, you know what? Now we got to this point. Why don't we just say who's the author of our Mishnah, the Tanakama? Just say it's Rabbi Yehuda's Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Fahad Tani Yehuda Breder Shimon Pazi Rameirki. And in the position that says that even lechatchila a cherish can make the bracha on truma, that's Rabbi Meir who says that you don't have to hear that what you say. But the point being is the Gemara kind of just backed itself into a corner here because we just revealed that there's a third position out there, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, who definitively takes the middle road and says that essentially a cherish could be motzi someone b'diavad post facto. Why can't Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah be the Tana of our Mishnah? So it's not all clear that Rav Yossi needs to be the Tana of our Mishnah. Maybe it actually is Rabbi Yehuda, just in the name of his Rebbe, Rav Elazar ben Azariah, who says that b'diavad, if you hear it, that's okay. All right, that's the end of the Gemara section. I want to bring in something maybe a little less technical, something really fundamental. I mean, obviously everything's Torah, everything's beautiful, everything's important. But if you take a look, we're not going to read the whole thing inside. The hour is getting late. But if you take a look at Tosfos, okay, so you look at the right side of your Gemara, that's Tosfos over there. Good to be acquainted. Rashi on the left, Tosfos on the right, going back to 19b. Go back to your Testament base. There's a nice long Tosfos there, but there's a general rule, like the longer ones are generally the easier ones, the shorter ones, because they're more terse, are the more difficult ones. So I'll just summarize what Tosfos' question is. Tosfos has the following question. We see that someone who is obligated on one level, okay, sorry, let me take a step back. Why can't a non-Jew be motzi me in the mitzvah of Megillah? Because a non-Jew is not obligated in the mitzvah of Megillah. So a non-Jew can't be motzi me because he's not commanded in that mitzvah. All right, so that's pretty obvious. Why can't a child be motzi someone in Megillah? After all, a child should be able to be motzi somebody in Megillah, even lechatchila, because the child is chayiv in mitzvos midrabanan on a rabbinical level. By the way, even this question is a whole separate sugya. When the mitzvah of chinuch, the mitzvah of children doing mitzvahs before their bar mitzvah or bas mitzvah, most assume that's an obligation incumbent upon the father / the parents to teach their kids how to keep mitzvahs. But kids are not obligated until they become b'nei mitzvah. But Tosfos assumes that kids themselves actually have a rabbinical level commandment to keep the mitzvahs. And then when they become b'nei mitzvah, then it becomes biblical. Then it becomes doraisa. So the question is, children are only obligated mitzvahs midrabanan. Mikra Megillah is a dirabanan level mitzvah. So why can't a child be motzi adults in Megillah, because everyone's obligated only on a dirabanan level? Good question.
Keep it
Yeah.
maybe respect for the congregation.
Oh, interesting. Toby brings up an important point of which we actually will get to. This will be a mission, I believe, in the fourth parak of Kavod Tzibor.
Right.
Right, exactly. So that's why they're actually a child, even if he's bar mitzvah, but he hasn't really grown facial hair yet. He still looks like like a little kid. So you're not supposed to put him up as chazan. And there's discussion Rishon, does it mean never put him up, or does it mean, maybe he shouldn't be the official cantor of the congregation? We did this a while back, talking about Tirta Tzibura. But that's an interesting, I would call, external consideration. But Tosas tells us something very interesting. Well, we got to do a little bit of arithmetic over here. How many Durabbanans are we dealing with? So take a look, actually. If you look at Tosas V'yesh Lomar, in the middle, this is where the answer is. We're talking about a kid who's reached a stage of chinuch. So adults are chayiv to hear Megillah on a rabbinical level. A katan emuchiv el midrabanan afiv b'shar mitzvos, whereas a child is only obligated in general on a drabanan level, meaning I start at a doraisa level. I start biblically obligated in general. A child's default is he's only obligated on a rabbinical level. The only derabanan I have is not that I inherently my mitzvah is derabanan. Inherently, every mitzvah I keep is biblically obligated. It just the only derabanan vis-a-vis me as an adult listening to this kid is that mikra Megillah is midrabanan. Sharei b'shar mitzvah chayv deraisa. So therefore, below asi trei derabanan umapik chad derabanan. You can't have two derabanans. 2 steps removed, kambi motzi only 1 derabanan. Adults only have 1 derabanan, the mitzvah mikra Megillah. The child has 2 strikes against him. One is he's a child. The second is the mitzvah mikra Megillah. So he's a double derabanan. You see this kind of like when we talk about on Shabbos, the shvus. It's not completely analogous, but many times we have a double derabanan. It's 2 steps removed. Asking a guy to do something for you is rabbinically forbidden, and then electricity we treat as rabbinically forbidden. So many times when many of the leniencies on Shabbos using a guy, that's called a shvus the shvus, a double derabanan. I can ask the guy to turn on the air conditioning because it's a shvus the shvus, and there's some sort of general tzorech that it's generally very hot. So right, so that's a double derabanan. The child is on a lower level than the adult. It's true. They're both obligated on a rabbinical level, but he's like 2 steps removed. Mikra Megillah, and he's a child. He has 2 strikes against him, so he can't be most of the adult as well. So that's Tosfos. Does that make sense? Double derabanan, yeah. So I want to briefly bring in the Turei Even. The Turei Even has. I've never actually finally purchased a hard copy of it. I've been quoting it actually extensively throughout our journeys in Megillah, but I never actually finally bought myself a hard copy. I was in your neck of the woods, Toby, the 5 towns, and I went into Z Berman, and I'm like, you know what, today's the day, because I wanted to just see this inside. And what he asks is the following question: you guys ever hear of a concept called Kol Yisrael Ravim Zeh B'Zeh? Right, so many times Kol Yisrael Ravim Zeh B'Zeh. Generally the rabbi, someone like myself, I get up there for a sermon and I start saying, Kumbaya, my Lord, and say, Kol Yisrael Ravim Zeh B'Zeh. We are all in it together. Every Jew is an Arev, is a guarantor for the other, and it's really this very mushy inspirational idea. Happens to be actually, we learned it from Sefer Yehoshua, when one guy sinned and then no one else stopped him, and then everyone had to perish because of him. So it's actually not such a feel-good idea. But halachically, what does Kol Yisrael Ravim Zeh B'Zeh mean? What Kol Yisrael Ravim Zeh B'Zeh teaches me is that, let's say we talked about this in the past, let's say I make Kiddush already, so you may have not heard Kiddush. So if you, for whatever reason, you don't know Kiddush, there's no bencher, you need someone to make Kiddush for you, and I know it, even though I make Kiddush already, I make it again. Why? I thought I have to share an obligation. I have to be chayv in order to be motzi someone else. What does Kol Yisrael Ravim Zeh B'Zeh teach me? That so long as another Jew has not fulfilled their mitzvah yet, to a certain degree, I'm still obligated in that mitzvah. It is a nice, beautiful idea at the end of the day. I don't want to detract from that as well. So the question over here Turei Even asks is, the child should still have some sort of chiyuv maybe because of Kol Yisrael Ravim Zeh B'Zeh. So what she answer is, he's not, actually children are not considered, they're not included in that principle. And possibly women also. There's a debate if women are included in Kol Yisrael Zebazeh, which it kind of reminds me, sometimes you go again to your neck of the woods or for Rockaway, so you see like these ads in the Jewish newspapers that talk about Achdus and everyone coming together, and it just shows like a bunch of men. So like Achdus, but like only men, not the rest of the Jewish people. Like women don't have to be included in the Achdus. So that's actually Hagufa. That's actually a machlokis in Kol Yisrael Arim Zebazeh if women are fundamentally included in there or not. So I guess we take the unorthodox position on this one. So his point is children are not included in Kol Yisrael Zebazeh, but wait a minute. But he still gives another answer to Tosos. Tosos' answer to why a child can't be motzi an adult if he did not read yet is because the child has a double derabanan. The Turei says, I don't care about one derabanan, two derabanans. You're both derabanan level. A child fundamentally should be able to be motzi an adult. He really should be able to make ikar. Fundamentally, a child can actually be motzi an adult in Megillah. Your 8-year-old, grandkid or child, they can get up there in a good shalom, and they can. It's not a policy, but fundamentally, they should be able to do that. Came along the Rabbanan though. The Rabbanan were concerned. When someone lanes Megillah on Purim, many times you lane more than once. You lane at the 8:30, and you lane at the 9:30. You want to, if you've practiced all your life for this, you want to lane more than once. You want to get the most out of that. So what's the issue? Once the child lanes once, he can't lane again for other people. It's like Nat Sandberg.
But that's the same as an adult.
Oh no, because an adult. So Nat Sandberg, let's say he lanes at the 6:30 chakras, right? And then he lanes again at 11 a.m., at 12 p.m., and at 1 p.m. The rest of the times, the reason he could be motzi other people is because of Kol Yisrael Zebazeh. Because so long as someone else didn't hear Megillah, he can still be motzi them. A child, though, once he fulfills his obligation, he doesn't have Kol Yisrael Zebazeh. He's not included in that. So what were the Rabbanan concerned? Yeah, you know what? A child really could be motzi an adult. But what's the concern the Rabbanan had? That if he's going to lane once, he's going to lane a second time. That second time, he doesn't have a chiyuv. And therefore, since he doesn't have a chiyuv, he can't be motzi others. So Rabbanan made a safeguard. They made a gezerah that children should not lane at all. Ought to, they might come to lane a second time, which is very plausible. And then they wouldn't be motzi anyone then. So actually, the Turei disagrees with Tosos. Tosos says children fundamentally cannot be motzi adults. Turei says children can actually be motzi adults in Megillah, but we're afraid that if they do it once, they'll reasonably want to lane more than once over the course of Yom Tov. And then because they're not chayiv, they don't have Kol Yisrael to make them chayiv again, so then people won't be yotzi from them. So better they don't lane at all than they lane and then cause other people to stumble. So very interesting approach from the Turei.
But I mean, if children are exempt from that, then are they exempt? I mean, are they exempt from like the mitzvah of being kind to other people or helping somebody that you see is having a difficulty walking or something like that? I mean,
so midrabanan, they would be obligated on a rabbinical level. But by the way, this whole premise.
No, but I'm saying, why would they be? I mean, if it's not a raven.
So Kari says once you fulfill your chiyuv, you become chayiv, kind of like, or you still somewhat chayiv because you have to help someone else out. Right. So, but they'd still be chayiv in like gemilas chasadim. That's a separate thing. Kol Yisrael Zebazeh is just like a halachic category to make you chayiv to do a mitzvah a second time. But I should just note again, the whole notion of children being chayiv midrabanan to be rabbinically obligated to do any mitzvahs is a controversial premise that Tosos is adopting. The mainstream opinion on the sugya, my understanding from a number of years ago, it's been a while, is that children actually are not obligated in squat. They don't have any responsibilities. It's the parents who have the chiyuv to ensure that their children do mitzvahs. So when little Johnny, makes a shahakal before eating his lollipop, he's not doing a mitzvah, but his parents are fulfilling a mitzvah by ensuring that little Johnny makes the bracha. So if little Johnny wants to help out his parents, he'll comply with them. But that's all.
I never realized how limited Kol Yisrael was.
By the way, that's a lot of mitzvahs. One of my favorite examples: "V'ahavta recha kamocha," love your neighbor as yourself. You see all those rallies. But you look, reacha is actually exclusive. It's only referring to Jews who fundamentally sign on to the Torah. So that's much more limiting than people would have you believe. There's actually a lot of limitations. We're pretty particularistic, exclusive religion, but that's for another time. All right, shkayak everyone, and not to worry. As mincha gets earlier, our shir gets earlier. I think this will keep the 40 minutes after mincha through the first 2 weeks of October, and at that point, mincha becomes so early that we'll just revert back to like a set time, either 7:30 or 8 o'clock. We'll decide as a group. All right,
Rabbi,
so I'll see you at 7:50.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I don't know why, but I got emails from 2 out of the 30 people that you sent emails to about the delay.
I think they accidentally replied all.
Huh?
I think they accidentally
Oh, that's
replied
what,
all.
but I never got one from you.
Oh, that's very odd. I'll
That's-
check to make sure you're on the list, but I'm glad you made it.
Well, yeah, I was on the list. I called Marina and she told me I was.
Oh, very odd.
I didn't understand what was going on.
All right, well, we'll let's be in touch directly. Maybe we could figure out a way to
Okay.
resolve that.
Thank you.
All right, take care, everyone. Have a wonderful night.
Good night and good
Shabbos.
Shabbos. Good
Shabbos.
Shabbos.